After I suffered a stroke, everything changed. My world turned upside down as I struggled to regain my health, but the shock came when I discovered that my children had divided up my assets without consulting me. It felt like a betrayal, like they saw me as powerless, someone they could take advantage of. I was overwhelmed, both physically and emotionally. The situation made me feel like I had lost all control over my own life. I couldn't believe they'd made such a decision without even talking to me. I spent days thinking about it, wrestling with my emotions. Finally, I realized I needed to do something to protect myself and ensure that my wishes were respected moving forward. So, I made the difficult decision to change my will. This wasn't just about the money, it was about taking back my voice, my dignity, and my future. It was about making sure that I, not anyone else, would have the final say in what happens to my legacy. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. The moment I woke up from the stroke, everything had changed. I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming or if the reality around me had shifted. But when the fog of confusion cleared and I found myself lying in that hospital bed, unable to move like I once had, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. The physical pain was one thing, but what truly left me paralyzed was the devastating emotional shock that followed shortly after. It wasn't the doctors who delivered the news. It wasn't a nurse or a close friend. It was my own children, my own flesh and blood, who came into my room with a kind of calm that felt foreign, that felt somehow detached. They had made decisions about my life, decisions about what was mine, without consulting me. I had always done everything for them. I had raised them, supported them through thick and thin, put their needs above my own, and sacrificed so much for their futures. But now, they had turned around and divided my assets without my involvement, without so much as a word of warning. It was as if they had already written me off, as if I were nothing more than a distant memory, a woman too frail and too weak to matter. The shock hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't comprehend it. How could they do this? How could they take everything I had worked for, everything I had carefully built for them, without a single conversation, without even letting me weigh in on what I wanted for my own future? I tried to speak, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. The stroke had robbed me of my strength, of my ability to move freely. I was completely dependent on others, and in that moment, it felt as though my children, the ones I had given everything to, had taken that power from me as well. I was lying there, immobilized, while they were making decisions for me that I had never agreed to. The betrayal was sharp and bitter. How could they? After all I had done for them, after all the sacrifices I made, this was how they repaid me? As the days passed in the hospital, I could feel the helplessness creeping in. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deeply they had violated my trust. I wasn't just shocked. I was devastated. My whole life I had prided myself on being there for my family, on being the one who could always be relied on to hold things together. I had worked tirelessly to provide for my children, to ensure they never had to want for anything. And this is what I got in return? The moment I became vulnerable, they took everything from me without a second thought. I wasn't sure how to process the pain of the betrayal, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let it stand. I couldn't let them get away with this. I had spent my life building a future for them, for us, and now it was slipping through my fingers. I was lying in that hospital bed, feeling more alone than I ever had before. But I also knew something else. The stroke might have left me physically weakened, but I wasn't completely powerless. My mind was still sharp, and I still had the ability to fight back. The pain I felt, the emotional devastation, it wasn't enough to break me. It wasn't enough to take away my will. The truth of the matter was that, in my confusion and anger, I had missed something important. As much as my children thought they were taking care of things for me, they had no idea how much they had underestimated me. They had acted out of a misguided sense of protection, but they had done it all without asking me what I wanted. And now, in the face of their actions, I realized that I was still in control of one thing: my future. At first, it seemed impossible. The idea of taking control again felt overwhelming. I was still weak. The stroke had taken so much from me, and yet, I could feel the fire within me begin to flicker. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that this wasn't just about the money or the assets they had divided. It was about my voice, my choices, and my right to decide my future. They might have taken what they wanted, but I could still take back what was mine. But I wasn't ready to face them yet. I wasn't ready to confront my children directly, not when the anger still simmered in my chest. I needed to take time to figure out what to do. I needed to find a way to make sure my wishes were respected, to ensure that my legacy wouldn't be stolen from me. That night, as I lay in that sterile hospital bed, I made a silent vow to myself. I would take control back. I would not let my children define my future. Not like this. What I didn't know at the time was that the road ahead would be far more complicated than I could ever have imagined. This wasn't going to be a quick fight. I would have to be strategic. I would have to make a plan. And most importantly, I would have to reclaim what had been taken from me without anyone even consulting me about it. The journey wasn't going to be easy, and I wasn't sure how it would end. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. I was still lying there, weak and unsure of how to proceed, but the idea began to take root. I had the strength to rise again. And when the time was right, I would show my children, and everyone else, that I was still here. I was still the one who would make the decisions, who would shape my own destiny. This would not be the end of my story. It was only the beginning. In the days that followed, my mind raced, unable to focus on anything other than the crushing weight of betrayal. My body was still recovering, still fragile from the stroke that had almost taken everything from me. But the emotional toll of what my children had done to me was far greater than the physical one. I had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. And now, lying in that bed, unable to move freely, I felt utterly powerless. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My children, the ones I had spent my life raising, had taken it upon themselves to divide my assets without asking for my input. They hadn't even waited for me to recover, to be able to speak my mind. How could they do this? I asked myself over and over. I had worked so hard, so relentlessly, to build a future for them. I had given up so much of my own life to make sure they were provided for, to make sure they never had to face the struggles I had when I was younger. And this is how they repay me. By stripping me of my autonomy, my agency, and my voice. The betrayal wasn't just about the assets. It was about the way they had discarded me, as though I no longer mattered. As if I was just another part of the past, no longer capable of having a say in what happened to me. I had always been a caretaker, putting the needs of my children, my family, before my own. But in that moment, I realized that I had never truly taken care of myself. I had always put others first, always worked to provide for everyone around me. And now that I needed them the most, they were making decisions without even consulting me. It was as if I had become invisible in their eyes, someone who was only valuable as long as I could take care of them. I lay in that bed, feeling utterly defeated. The stroke had already taken so much from me. My strength, my mobility, my ability to communicate easily. But this was different. This felt like a loss I couldn't recover from. It wasn't just the physical limitations I was dealing with. It was the emotional devastation of knowing that the very people I had spent my life loving and nurturing could take such drastic steps without even a thought to how it would affect me. As the days passed, I tried to focus on my recovery. I forced myself to go through the motions of physical therapy, even though every step felt like an insurmountable challenge. But all I could think about was how my children had taken everything from me. They had divided up my assets, restructured everything without even considering my feelings or my wishes. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. And the more that anger grew, the more I began to realize something important. I had to take control. I had to stand up for myself, even if it meant going against my children. At first, I wasn't sure how I was going to do that. I couldn't even speak properly, let alone handle the legalities of my estate. I felt overwhelmed, trapped in my own body, struggling with the simplest of tasks. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that if I didn't act now, it would be too late. My children had already made decisions without me, decisions that affected the rest of my life. And if I didn't take control, if I didn't assert my rights, I would lose everything. I needed help. So, I reached out to a lawyer, someone I trusted to guide me through the process. It wasn't easy. The stroke had left me weak, and there were times when I doubted whether I was capable of navigating the legal system or making the necessary decisions. But I knew that if I didn't act, I would be allowing my children to dictate my future, and I couldn't let that happen. I had spent too many years working hard to build a life for myself and my family. I wasn't going to let them take that from me without a fight. The first meeting with the lawyer was awkward, to say the least. I felt embarrassed, vulnerable, unsure of myself. But the lawyer was kind, patient, and understanding. She listened as I explained the situation, how my children had divided my assets without my consent, and how betrayed I felt. As I spoke, I could feel the anger welling up inside me again. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't going to let that anger consume me. I was going to use it, harness it, and take control of my situation. The lawyer began explaining my options. I could contest the division of assets, she told me, but it would take time, and it wouldn't be easy. My children would likely resist, and there would be legal battles ahead. But I wasn't afraid of a fight. Not anymore. I had spent my entire life making sacrifices for others, but now it was time to make sure my own wishes were respected. As the meeting came to an end, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since the stroke, I felt like I had some control over my life again. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. I wasn't ready to confront my children yet. I didn't know how to explain to them what I had done. I didn't know how they would react. But I knew that I couldn't keep living in the shadow of their decisions. I couldn't keep allowing them to dictate what happened to me. It was time for me to take control of my own future, no matter how difficult it would be. As I left the lawyer's office, I felt a sense of determination settling over me. The road ahead would be long and hard, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let my children take my future from me. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I had spent my life supporting them, giving everything I had to make sure they had a future. Now, it was my turn to make sure my wishes were respected. It was my turn to fight for what was rightfully mine. And I would do whatever it took to make that happen. The decision to fight back was the hardest one I'd ever made. As much as I hated the idea of confronting my children, I knew it was the only way to reclaim my future. I was still recovering physically, still adjusting to the reality of life post-stroke, but mentally, I felt sharp, and with that sharpness came clarity. The betrayal my children had enacted on me was not just a financial issue. It was a matter of my dignity. It was a violation of the trust that had taken years to build, and I wasn't about to let that be erased by their actions. The days following my meeting with the lawyer were a blur. I wasn't sure how to navigate the storm I was about to enter, but I knew I had to prepare. I had spent my life in service of others, my children, my family, and had given up pieces of myself in the process. I had always put my family first, making sure they had everything they needed. But now, it was time to put myself first. The thought filled me with both relief and guilt. How could I possibly prioritize my own needs after everything I had done for them? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about selfishness. It was about reclaiming my voice, my power. I wasn't asking for revenge, but I needed to be heard. The time had come to assert my rights. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about what I had built for them. It was about making sure my wishes were respected. I wasn't ready to let go of my life, my choices. They had taken that from me once, and I wasn't going to let them do it again. I knew what I had to do. The lawyer had told me that I could contest the distribution of my assets, but it wasn't a simple process. The law would be on my side, but it would take time, and it would likely be emotionally taxing. The thought of dragging my children through a legal battle made my stomach churn. But I couldn't let that stop me. They had forced my hand. They had made their move without asking me. Now it was my turn. I started to gather everything I could, the documentation from my will, any previous conversations or agreements I had made with them, everything that could help my case. I had always prided myself on being organized, and that skill would be essential now. I was prepared to fight, to make sure my wishes were honored, even if it meant going against the very people I had spent my life supporting. In the quiet moments, when I was alone with my thoughts, doubt would creep in. I'd wonder if I was making a mistake. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe they didn't mean to hurt me. But the doubt was always fleeting. I couldn't ignore what they had done. They had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to take a stand. The thought of confronting them directly, of sitting down with my children and telling them that I was challenging their decisions, filled me with anxiety. But I knew that it was necessary. I had to take control. I remember the first time I made the call to my children after I'd begun taking legal steps. I was so nervous, my hands shaking as I dialed the number. The conversation felt strange from the moment they picked up. There was an awkward silence on the other end before my daughter spoke, her voice softer than usual. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling?" It was a simple question, but it carried weight, as if she were hesitant, unsure of what to say after everything that had happened. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I knew what I had to say. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "I need to talk to you and your brother about something important. I've made some decisions about my will." There was a pause, then her voice cracked, a mixture of surprise and frustration. "Mom, we thought we were doing what was best for you. Why are you changing everything now? We just wanted to make sure everything was in order, that you wouldn't have to worry." I understood her frustration. I understood their intentions, at least, on some level. But the truth was, they had assumed things about me without consulting me. They had presumed that I was too weak, too far gone to make my own decisions. But they were wrong. "I appreciate your concern," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "But this is something that should have been discussed with me. You can't make decisions about my future without including me in the conversation. I'm still here. I'm still able to make my own choices, and that includes how my assets are distributed." I could hear her breathing, the silence stretching out as she processed my words. She didn't argue immediately, and that silence made me feel both heard and alienated at the same time. The conversation didn't last long. She promised we'd talk more later, but I knew that what I had said had already set things in motion. They would be angry. They would feel betrayed. But I couldn't back down now. The next few days were filled with anticipation. I knew my children would confront me about the legal steps I was taking. It wasn't a question of if they would react. It was a question of how. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was certain of one thing. They needed to understand that I wasn't just giving up. I wasn't fading away quietly into the background of my own life. I had spent years supporting them, and now it was time for me to ensure that my wishes were respected. When the confrontation finally came, it wasn't as explosive as I had imagined, but it was just as painful. My son called, his voice tense, but controlled. "Mom, we need to talk. This isn't how things should be. You're not in a position to handle this right now. You should just let us take care of things for you." I knew what he was implying. He didn't believe I was capable of handling the complexities of my own estate. The stroke had taken away some of my abilities, yes, but it hadn't taken away my mind. It hadn't taken away my right to make decisions about my life. "I don't need you to take care of everything for me," I replied, my voice firm. "I need you to respect my wishes. You're not in charge of my life. I am." It was a simple statement, but one that had taken me a long time to reach. I wasn't trying to punish them. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I just wanted them to understand that I was still here, that I still mattered. Over the next few days, the tension between us was palpable. My children didn't understand my actions, and they were angry. They felt like I was rejecting their help, like I was challenging everything they had done for me. But what they didn't see was that this wasn't about rejecting them, it was about reclaiming my own autonomy. I wasn't ready to be treated like a passive participant in my own life. I began to see, slowly, that this situation wasn't just about money or assets. It was about my identity. About how I wanted to be remembered and treated. I wasn't just their mother. I was a person in my own right. I had built this life, and I had every right to ensure that my wishes were carried out. It was a slow and painful journey, but with every step, I began to feel stronger. The anger I felt at their betrayal wasn't going to consume me. Instead, it was going to fuel my resolve. I wasn't going to let them take what was mine. Not anymore. The days after I made the decision to challenge my children were filled with a mix of dread and determination. It wasn't the easiest thing to stand firm against the very people I had spent my life loving and raising. Every time I thought about them, how much I had sacrificed for them, how much I had given up for their well-being, the guilt would creep in. But then, like a sharp reminder, the truth of the situation would hit me all over again. They had made decisions about me, about my future, without even asking me. They had assumed I couldn't think for myself, couldn't decide for myself anymore. That was the moment I had to change the narrative. I had spent the majority of my life living for others. From the moment they were born, my children became my world. I worked tirelessly to provide for them, to ensure they would have the opportunities one never had. I sacrificed my own dreams, my own desires, just to make sure they would never have to struggle the way I had. And now, I was lying in that hospital bed, physically broken and emotionally shattered, realizing that the people I had trusted the most had stripped me of my voice. I had been their mother, their caretaker, but now, in the twilight of my life, they had taken it upon themselves to decide what was best for me. It felt like an incredible betrayal, one that stung in ways I couldn't easily articulate. Every time I tried to think clearly, to focus on the legal steps ahead of me, the anger would flare up. How could they not see me? How could they not see the person I was? Someone who had spent a lifetime doing everything for them. I was no longer that strong, invincible figure to them. To them, I was simply someone in need of care. They had taken over my life, my legacy, in one swift, thoughtless act. My heart pounded in my chest every time I thought about it. How could they just go ahead and divvy up my belongings, without any respect for my wishes? I had spent so many years taking care of them, thinking of their futures, but now it was time for me to think of mine. And that's when I began to make my plan. Every conversation I had with my lawyer left me feeling more confident. The legal process wasn't simple. It wasn't something that could be done quickly, especially since my children were not likely to be cooperative. They had already shown their hand. They thought they knew what was best. But what they didn't realize was that they had underestimated me. The lawyer had suggested I write a new will, one that clearly stated my wishes and ensured that my assets would go to the people I deemed fit. But even as I began to take those steps, a question lingered in my mind. Was I doing the right thing? Was I turning my children against me by asserting my control over my own life? The guilt gnawed at me. I had always been the one who sacrificed, the one who gave everything, and now I was forcing a confrontation that could destroy everything we had built. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I had given so much, and now it was time for me to take back what was rightfully mine. I had spent too many years building this life, and I wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. As I began to make the changes to my will, I found myself questioning every decision I made. I could feel the weight of each word I wrote, each clause that was added. This wasn't just a legal document. This was the foundation for my legacy. And yet, the process was slow, grueling. It wasn't as if I could just write everything down and be done with it. Each word seemed to carry the weight of years of sacrifice, years of silent suffering. The more I went through the process, the more I realized how much of my own life I had overlooked. This wasn't just about the material things. It was about my story, my life. It was about leaving a legacy that represented who I truly was, not just who I had been as a mother or as a caretaker. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had allowed my identity to be defined by others for so long. I had lost myself in the process of giving to them. But now, it was time to reclaim who I was. I had spent so many years thinking about their future, but now I had to think about my own. The more I worked through the legalities of changing my will, the more I saw my children's actions for what they truly were. An attempt to take control of a life that wasn't theirs to control. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. It was about acknowledging that I had a right to decide my own future, no matter how frail my body had become. No matter how weak I felt, I was still here. I was still capable of making decisions. And I was not going to let them take that away from me. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional weight of what I was doing started to bear down on me. I had always been a person who avoided conflict, who sought to keep the peace. But in this case, there was no peace. There was only the cold, hard truth. My children had taken from me, and it was up to me to get it back. The legal fight was coming, and with it would come the confrontation I had dreaded. My children still didn't know what I was planning. They didn't know that I had already taken the first steps to ensure that my wishes would be followed. Every time I saw them, every time I spoke to them, there was this unspoken tension between us. They didn't understand why I was doing this, why I was changing everything they had assumed about me. To them, I was simply a mother in need of their care. But to me, I was so much more than that. I was a person with my own thoughts, my own desires, my own voice. I knew that once they found out what I was doing, it would cause an explosion. It wasn't a matter of if they would be angry, it was a matter of how they would react. They would be hurt, confused, angry. I could already imagine the arguments, the accusations. They would tell me that I was making a mistake, that I was being unreasonable. But I wasn't making a mistake. I was standing up for myself, for what I had worked my whole life to build. I had spent so many years putting their needs ahead of mine, sacrificing my own desires for the sake of their happiness. But I couldn't do that anymore. It was time for me to live my life on my own terms, and if that meant creating a rift between us, then so be it. The day finally came when I had to tell them. I had prepared myself as much as I could, but I still didn't know what to expect. My heart was pounding in my chest as I dialed the number to my daughter's phone. She picked up after a few rings, her voice sounding tired, strained. "Hi, Mom. What's going on?" "I need to talk to you," I said, trying to steady my voice. "It's about the will. I've made some changes. Important changes." The silence on the other end of the line was suffocating. She didn't speak for a long time, and in that silence, I could feel her confusion, her uncertainty. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, her voice small, almost fearful. "I've decided to take control of my future," I said, my voice firm despite the emotions swirling inside me. "The way things were done, the way you divided my assets without me, that's not how I want it. I'm changing things. I need you to respect my wishes." There was a long pause, and then she spoke again, her words laced with anger. "Mom, why are you doing this? We were trying to help you. We were just trying to make sure everything was okay." "I know you were trying to help," I said, my voice softening. "But you didn't ask me. You didn't include me in any of the decisions. And that's not okay. This is my life, my legacy, and I need to make sure my wishes are honored. You don't get to decide that for me." The conversation was difficult, and it didn't end on a positive note. I could hear the hurt in her voice, the disbelief that I would challenge her decision. But I wasn't backing down. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how much I loved them, take that from me. The finality of the decision I had made settled on me like a heavy cloak. My heart was still heavy with the weight of what had transpired. My children had always been my world, the reason I had worked so hard, the reason I had sacrificed my own dreams for theirs. But as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized something fundamental had changed in me. I wasn't the same person I had been before the stroke. I wasn't just the mother who had taken care of everyone, who had put her children's needs above her own. I was still a person with a voice, with rights, with the power to shape my own future. And that was a truth that I had spent too long denying. The betrayal they had inflicted upon me was painful, but it also became the catalyst for something I needed, an awakening of sorts. It wasn't just about reclaiming what they had taken from me in terms of money or assets. It was about my own life, my autonomy. They had thought they were doing the right thing by stepping in, by making decisions for me without consulting me. But what they didn't realize was that in doing so, they had taken away my dignity. And it was that dignity I was now determined to reclaim. In the weeks that followed the tense conversations, I stayed focused on moving forward with the changes I had made to my will. I knew my children were angry, but I also knew something else. They needed to see me standing up for myself. They needed to understand that I was not someone to be dismissed, that my voice still mattered, even if it was uncomfortable for them to hear. The road to recovery, both physical and emotional, was long, and it often felt lonely. There were times when I regretted the conflict, the distance it had created between me and my children. But then, just as I was beginning to feel overwhelmed by the isolation, I had a breakthrough. My daughter called again, her tone softer this time. She didn't start the conversation by discussing the will or the decisions I had made. Instead, she asked how I was doing, how my recovery was going. Her question was simple, but it was something I hadn't heard in weeks. A question not laced with judgment or frustration, but with genuine concern. And that simple question, that small gesture, was like a thread that began to unravel the tension between us. We spoke for a while, and though the conversation was awkward at times, there was a shift in her voice. She apologized, not just for the decisions they had made, but for not understanding sooner why I had taken the steps I did. I guess I never realized how much you've always been the one making the tough decisions for everyone else, she said, her voice almost breaking. I didn't see that you needed to make this decision for yourself too. I'm sorry. Hearing those words from her brought a wave of relief that I hadn't expected. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. There was still so much healing that needed to take place, but it was a step forward. I wasn't asking for their full approval of the changes I had made, but I needed them to understand that I had done it for the right reasons. It was never about rejecting their care or love. It was about reclaiming my sense of self. I still wasn't sure where our relationship would go from here, but I knew that I had made the right decision for me. And as I continued to heal, both physically and emotionally, I began to realize something even more profound. The strength to stand up for myself, to protect my autonomy, had been with me all along. The stroke may have taken my mobility and left me vulnerable in ways I had never anticipated, but it had also given me the clarity to see what really mattered. In the weeks that followed, I made more efforts to reach out to my children, to rebuild the bridges that had been burned. The process was slow, and at times, it felt like we were taking one step forward and two steps back. But that was okay. Healing wasn't an immediate thing. Relationships take time, and I wasn't in a rush. The most important thing was that we were talking again. We were trying to understand each other. My children didn't have to agree with everything I had done, but they needed to accept that my life, my choices, were mine to make. I often thought back to the days after my stroke, to that moment when I realized my children had divided my assets without my consent. It felt like a loss at the time, a deep wound that I wasn't sure I would ever recover from. But what followed that loss was something unexpected. A chance to rebuild my sense of self, a chance to take back the life I had always given to others. I had spent so much of my life serving them, giving them everything, that I had forgotten to live for myself. And in the end, it was that reminder, of who I was, of what I was entitled to, that gave me the strength to take back what was mine. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never again allow myself to be pushed aside. I had reclaimed my voice, my power, and my future. The legal battles were not over, and the tension in my family would take time to heal, but I had done something that I never thought possible. I had stood up for myself, in the most difficult and painful way imaginable. And in doing so, I had reclaimed not just my estate, but my sense of self. I realized now that the stroke, as devastating as it was, had been a turning point. It had forced me to confront my vulnerabilities, to see the parts of myself that I had neglected for too long. And from that confrontation, I had emerged stronger, more aware of my own worth, and more determined than ever to live the life I had spent so many years giving up. And as the dust settled, I looked forward with a sense of hope, knowing that no matter what happened next, I was no longer afraid. I was in control of my own destiny. And for the first time in a long while, I was finally living life on my terms. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, more difficult conversations, and more pain to navigate. But now, I had the strength to face it all. My children would eventually understand. I had given them everything I had. But now, it was my turn. My turn to take control of my own life. And in that, I found a peace I had never known before. And as I lay back, looking out the window at the sun setting, I couldn't help but feel a quiet, deep satisfaction. I had fought for what was mine. And, in the end, I had won.